Welcome to the Dope Black Dads podcast, a place where we are changing the narrative and having progressive conversations about black fathers, as well as creating a safe digital space for the community. Hi, my name is Marvin Harrison, and today on the Dope Black Dads podcast, I'm talking about Kobe Bryant in its full entirety. The man, the profession, the 2003 incident that he was charged with, as well as his wonderful daughter who passed away also, and his legacy. There is also a massive question around Gayle King, and I'm really going to try and go through it today, also observing and being mindful about the sensitivity of the issue, but also really trying to understand where are we trying to get to and how are we going to get there. Today, I wanted to tackle a very, very difficult subject. As we all know, Kobe Bryant passed away on the 24th of Jan 2020. He was in a helicopter crash in Calabasas, which is in the Los Angeles or the wider Los Angeles area of California. 7 people, including him and his daughter, 10 people and him and his daughter passed away in that crash. He was 41 years old. Extremely sad, extremely difficult to absorb. He is a very much loved and revered basketball player, but also just as a dope black dad and a amazing dope black dad, especially based on the commitments that he made to his daughter's team, financing, supporting every single game. And in fact, he was actually going to a game with his daughter when the crash happened. Makes it ever more sad. So that's what's happened. He's passed away. I personally wanted to wait until his funeral, which happened, I think it was on the 24th of February, before really taking a view and a comment in podcast form. I was very, very present in the moment to what had happened, and a lot of dads were affected in our US group, South Africa group, and our UK group were all affected by this. What the challenge was is the sensitivity around his legacy and wanting to share a wider view on who he was, but also a wider view on how reporting of people passing happens. We're in a very sensitive time around sexual misconduct, rape, and sexual violence in general against women. And, you know, we spend a lot of time wanting to be on the right side of history on all matters. But there are inconsistencies, challenges, things that just don't sit right in just having a blanket response to these things. So just for those who don't know, Kobe Bryant, if you don't know who he was, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. He had 5 NBA championships. He was an MVP twice in the finals, 18-time All-Star, 4-time All-Star MVP. So the All-Star games are the games that they have at the year with the best players from each position. They play off against each other. In those games, you can then be called an MVP as well as being just general MVP of the finals of a actual championship. So that's the team you're actually contracted to. So at that time, it would have been the Lakers. He has 2 gold medals in 2008 and 12. To be fair, 2 gold medals in basketball doesn't make any difference because the US dominate basketball every year. Bearing in mind they invented it. He won an Oscar in 2018 for his animated short Dear Basketball. Raised in Italy until a teenager, so culturally slightly different to many other teens, black or otherwise. Spoke multiple languages, of course. Drafted by the Charlotte Hornets, and then teamed up with Shaq and Phil Jackson. Shaquille O'Neal is a dominant, probably one of the best forwards ever in the league, and Phil Jackson was the coach of the Bulls with Michael Jordan, so a legendary coach. So when they all got together, they won 3 straight championships back to back. actually had quite a fictitious relationship with Shaquille O'Neal. Started off very well. I think there was some questions around Shaquille's fitness and commitment and general attitude, and I think Kobe felt as if Shaquille was more professional, they would be more dominant and win more championships. So I think after a while, tensions frayed. I think there was later on some talk about Shaquille O'Neal cheating on his wife, which caused Shaquille to go through separation and ultimately divorce in his relationship. So, in terms of what he did, I will say he was signed to Sony Records in 2000. He had a rap career with his, I think it was his university college friends. They formed a rap crew and got a single out, which was fantastic. He got dropped afterwards when it died, but being signed is still a thing. So in terms of like who was Kobe professionally, highest of the high. I think maybe, especially in the modern era, and I'll say modern era is post Jordan, probably only really Kobe, Michael Jordan, and LeBron sit in that special place. There's like Allen Iverson, who people just love because he was a raw, incredible talent. But I think in terms of like winners, there's probably about 4 or 5 who dominate in that way. So he's very much loved. Definitely top 5 of all time, and definitely will be fondly remembered for the work he did inside and outside. I think where the blemish is and where the challenge is and where the struggle is in 2003. He was accused of sexual assault. From my understanding, he had. I've been reading up on this all day. So, from my understanding, he was staying in a property or a hotel. There was a woman on reception. They were doing a tour of the property, which she attended as a part of the welcoming team to him being on the property. And later on, she returned to his room, which is where she says the sexual misconduct happened or the sexual assault happened. The charges were dropped when she refused to testify. There were some civil proceedings which led to him paying out a large sum of money or undisclosed sum of money. It's interesting because Kobe believes it was consensual, which if I'm going to be an absolute cynic, I'll play the line of the cynic. Kobe Bryant, there was a woman who was screaming "Believe women" at a rally, and it really stuck with me because it's really hard when people talk about rape, sexual assault, sexual misconduct, flirting, who moved to who started it, and in a world where men have been, I would say, even taught to be sexually aggressive or assertive from the beginning of time. I remember some of the horrific ideas that men in and around me and boys that I knew growing up would have around women and how you get the pussy or the vagina or how you get sex from women was basically taking it. It was basically creating environments where saying no was difficult or not an option. It was discussed in such a way, it was as if to say the actual consensual part wasn't essential to the process of getting into a sexual relationship with a woman. It was almost, she doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't know what she's saying yes or no to. If you just grab her by the arm and pull her, she can't stop you. So then you're kissing. And once you're kissing, it's all consensual anyway, because women don't kiss men who they don't want to. And so she either has to pull away and be super aggressive back to you and match that aggression that you pulled her forward with. Otherwise, she really does want it. And even if she says no, if you keep going, she'll say yes at some point. And I just remember hearing these things. It's funny because my mum, bless her, but she always made it explicitly clear that when a woman says no is no, and that stuck in my head. And to be fair, it's more, there's a much deeper layer before that. Like saying no should be done from a form of respect. It shouldn't be done because you disrespected her and now she's saying no. You should be respectful. But that no part really stuck in my head, and it felt I felt hypersensitive to the idea of someone saying no being no. So I've always been built with that, but I don't believe that's universal. I would say it's common out of respect to many people that I know, but I wouldn't say it's universal. A no, the no's was more like try a different way, wait 15 minutes, get her so aroused that she can't say no, and now she wants to say yes. And a whole sexual social ecosystem has been built on no meaning try harder or try differently or try later. And growing up in the 90s and 2000s, just it didn't feel at the time, and obviously I'm a guy, so I wouldn't know. It didn't feel like a sexual hotbed. It felt like people were listening more than ever at that time. It felt like, no, you can't just do that because women are being heard, and I fully appreciate that convictions on around this area is difficult and less likely than ever, and common to not actually happen. But I also remember a shift culturally of just how men felt about this, and ultimately how they became connected to a better way of doing things. So for me, I think we talk about the incident, and there's a couple of other things that are really important in terms of how we consider it. He was 24 at the time, and so he's not a child. He's not, and to be fair, even if he was a child, still not okay. Again, lots of caveats in this, but he's 24. He's a grown up at this point. He's already in the limelight. He's already been in the league for 7 years, so he's aware of what is and isn't possible, what the world is. So extreme poor judgment on his side to even be in that. He's also married, so there's a question of adultery. Now, I'm never going to be someone who sits there and stands on a horse and acts like adultery is the lowest form of existence, but it is a question. It's an insight into a mentality around women. I think there's a culture within that around basketball, or professional sports or high net worth people and what's possible. So I fully do accept and understand that also. But if you're married and you're engaging in that type of behavior, there's an insight into a mentality that allows you or makes you empowered to do so. When the case was brought up about him in post this, when they discussed what the image was or what the perception was of him afterwards, he definitely did acknowledge that it's complicated. And he was referencing in an interview about, yes, on one hand, it's important that people know who I really am and not what's fabricated, but there are some questions, and he's never really spoken about it since. He's never really been held to task since. He's been allowed to operate since 2003 with a no answer on that topic since that day. And probably it wasn't until he won the Oscar in 2018 that there was another question, another movement around asking him what was, some of the impact of what had happened and how people felt about it started coming up. And there was a lot of Me Too movements in Black women specifically who were questioning him receiving an Oscar with the history that he had. I think that's a slightly different point, but it's still really interesting. Also, another thing that's interesting, the actual charge that was against him was a felony assault. So the actual sexual element wasn't referenced in the charge. It was more about the bruising and the physicality that was either during or preceding the incident. So there's something there about the level of bruising that she went through and received during the process of what he calls consensual and what she called not consensual. So there's just so many variables. Another thing is that during the trial, her name was released by the courts on 3 occasions. So there was like a removal of the privacy, which made it almost impossible to have the idea of like a secret trial or have it in a way that wasn't going to be managed and impacted by the media. And so I think it's not as straightforward and as simple. I think it requires some sensitivity. There was also some insights, which is, look, I think often when we talk about sexual misconduct charges or rape charges or sexual assault charges, and we're doing it within the context of someone famous or even someone you know, there is this culture of trying to go through the story and pick out the parts of the story that would devalue the accuser's story. So it's kind of like, oh, so you were on at work and you were a receptionist and then you went to his room. That's unprofessional. Why did you go to his room if it wasn't for sex? So clearly you wanted it. So in wanting it, it couldn't be rape. Like that type of language and attitude. There was also one part that came out which was I suppose it adds to the story, so it's worth sharing. That she had sex with someone 15 hours, 5 hours after the alleged rape. And she also had sex just before the examination process. So, in the eyes of the cynical other side of it, someone who would be wanting to defend Kobe, you would ask the questions, if you had sex with was raped or sexually assaulted by Kobe Bryant, would you then have sex with somebody else 15 hours later? Is that where the bruising occurred? Is that where, how do you differentiate the two acts in terms of which one was and wasn't, which was bruising and which one wasn't bruising? Where did those bruises actually come from? So there's an inconsistency there, or a difficulty in terms of interpreting the intention, the action, and what that means. So it just means it's not a linear case. I kind of feel like when we talk about rape and sexual assault, when people say it, I visualize someone being dragged into a bush. It's a very Crime Watch for those who are in Britain and watched Crime Watch growing up. It was a crime show about, reenacting crimes so that people could try and jog their memory and help find the perpetrator. But I remember you watch it and then you'll see this guy who's like walking behind a woman and then he was like grab her into a bush and rape her, and you think right there is so cut and clear that guy is a rapist, and that's what I think a rapist is, and that's what I think sexual assault is. But in reality, the fluidity of social settings and dating and sliding in DMs, and there's a lot of difficulty and gray area of interactions, and it's very, very feasible you can go through your life without ever being on the wrong side of this. You should be. It's not actually easy to be on the wrong side of this, but at the same time, it's not as if the universal definition of grabbing someone and throwing them in the bush is universal. Everyone looks at that and will be like, that's, yeah, of course. But it's a bit like racism, where someone's sitting there calling me a N-word to my face and then having a tattoo and swastika and, and like having his house tattooed and painted in a particular way or whatever would tell us that this person is racist. But what if he's just like a bit more subtle of a racist, and he's just like, undercover, won't give me a job kind of racist, doesn't tell anyone, but looks at me and think that guy's not going to work hard because black people don't work hard. That's still racist. And, somebody who goes to a room to meet somebody and then against their will is made to have sex against their will, or forcefully having sex with them, those things are still wrong. And I think that is the difficulty. So that's the 2003 case. And look, when we talk about the other side of that part of Kobe, or the complexities around him and his name, we then talk about Gayle King. So Gayle King is on CBS, and she has an interview with Lisa Leslie, who's a WNBA star, one of the biggest faces of WNBA, also a friend of Kobe. They've done tons of like advert and work together. And they're doing an interview post Kobe passing, and I'll play the clip. This is the clip that from the actual interview.
Is it even a fair question to talk about it, considering he's no longer with us and that it was resolved? Or is it really part of his history?
I think that the media should be more respectful at this time. It's like if you had questions about it, you've had many years to ask him that. I don't think it's something that we should keep hanging over his legacy. I mean, it went to trial.
Yeah, it was dismissed because the victim in the case refused to testify. So it was dismissed.
And I think that's how we should leave it.
So for me, the thing that I found really difficult is the timing. Um, because in our group, so dope black men, dope black women, dope black mums, we do speak to each other often. And one of the founders of Dope Black Women, she's a really good friend of mine, Leanne. We had this conversation, and she's someone who's like believe women, and she has the conviction and reminds me like believe women. Even when you go through that logical process, she's like believe women, and I'm like, you know what, you're right. Let me shut up, which is why I paused and waited. But for me with Gayle King, the timing felt strange. And before Gayle King, to be fair, there was a journalist who I think was with the Washington Post who I think the day of his passing was tweeting about his sexual misconduct charge and talking about the accounts of 2003, and ultimately she was suspended as because of the sensitivity around the subject and the timing and my view is that I think if the conversation isn't happening at the time, it's very difficult to lead with that part of the conversation in the moment of his passing. So I think with R. Kelly, if he died today, I think that's different. And R. Kelly is a very different case. So I don't really want to conflate. It's all blurred lines, but I think in a cold light or without all the wider context, if R. Kelly was to die today, the context would be about his sexual past and his music, and then that would be a complete picture of him, and nobody would see that as disingenuous. Same thing for Michael Jackson. At the time with Michael Jackson, there was cases rumbling again. There had been maybe 2 or 3 cases that had happened previously, maybe 3, and some payoffs. So relatively in that time frame, it made sense to talk about it. I think in the moment though, when someone's so loved in their prime, also his daughter passing, I think the narrative of it dictated that people didn't want a wider picture en masse. Obviously, with people that were behind the Me Too movement or who were fighting for rights of women wanted that conversation because that's a part of the conversation. It's a part of the hiding that has been going on for many years, where we've ignored people's dark side because they've been able to play a game very well, which shouldn't suffice. So very, very sort of interesting contextual part. But what I found difficult is when you're asking a friend about, and it's a woman, and it's a black woman, and she's connected to the NBA. So in context, yes, I get, but that's the kind of behavior I expect from someone that's not from our community in a weird way. And I'm torn here. I don't know what the framework. I don't know what this actually is, but there's something that didn't sit well with the timing being, I think it was less than a week later. The person he was talking to was an actual friend, and she's WNBA and she's black, and it's almost a little bit uncomfortable to ask her. So the first part is more of a defense of Lisa. Of she's probably not the person you should pose that question to, because it feels like you're trying to dig an answer out of him. So either you're weaponizing Lisa to give a firm account of how she feels about Kobe at that time around the complex situation that she doesn't agree with, but she's representing black women. So it's almost like you're pitting black women against this accusation to make it in a way that makes it difficult for a nuanced or appropriate way that they wanted to share. It's different if she had just said to her, could you tell us more about Kobe Bryant, and just allowed her to speak. And you could have doubled down and be like, how did you feel about, his legacy? Which I think that first question is genuine. When she gave her response and she was like, I don't see it that way. That's not the person I know. I think the girl being at that point, like you wouldn't see it though. I felt agenda led. I think it's very nuanced. This is not a straightforward, because she challenged it and brought it up, it's immediately a problem. It just felt the timing was bad. I think the doubling down on the point was bad. It had bad optics. I don't feel like this is a conversation that people were hunting for answers for in the time of his passing. I think he had led a consistent life afterwards. And we could have asked him when he was here. Like, I felt like that's a credible thing. If we really wanted answers, that could have been the agenda right there and then. And I would have been down to hear it. Like, even knowing more about the story than I did previously, that's one thing, but he would need to update his account. If you want to be relevant in this modern era, you need to align in this modern era with, things that happen historically need to be retold within the context. But another thing that's worth sharing is that the context of 2003 is very, very different. And another element, which isn't an excuse, but it's an observation that needs to be taken into account. When you put the 2003 case into the context of 2003, it's very, very different. And also the racial divide. So having a white woman in the US accusing him of this. This is like on the back of OJ Simpson. There's like a 10-year gap between those things. So there are things that create a context of that time that change how things are reported, how things are perceived, how people choose to prosecute, how people choose to dismiss or support certain things. So those contexts aren't to be ignored also. It's like a very specific time. But yeah, just going back to Gayle King, I think the audio there really made it difficult to not feel like there was some sort of agenda. And I think what textures that, again, above and beyond just the simplicity of what was shared, is the fact that her and Oprah, Oprah's girl's best friends with Oprah, they have done, and supported films, documentaries, accounts against R. Kelly, Bill Cosby, Russell Simmons, Michael Jackson, all black men. And her spiritual advisor, this is Oprah's spiritual advisor, who I assume is a friend and connected to, has also been accused of, is actually in jail, I believe, for sexual assault, and it might even be with minors. I should have actually checked. I'm very sorry. But check out Oprah's spiritual advisor. There's something there. And so she's never done anything about it. She's never done a documentary about my friend who behaved a certain way and I didn't know, or she's just never said a word. And I think the same goes for Harvey Weinstein, who was in many events and parties with her. There's a really horrific, scary picture of Harvey Weinstein hovering over Rita Ora, and Rita Ora's holding Oprah's arm like, please don't let this monster near me. There are rumors that in that context, she said something to Rita Ora like, just go and stop being silly. I have no idea if that's true. That was said, but as a caption, but it could also be completely made up because the internet is the internet. But I think you are aligned with Bill Clinton. There's tons of questions around him. You're aligned with Epstein. There's obviously clearly questions around him. You're aligned with Harvey Weinstein and your spiritual advisor. So for you to go on this high horse around black men is hugely troubling and a question mark. And again, look, I don't need to go into a celebratory rant about Oprah. We love many things about Oprah, pretty much everything about Oprah. She's an incredible woman with an incredible story. Also a survivor of sexual assault as a minor also, or it might have been child rape. I'm not actually sure what the full details are, but hugely, amazing woman. But at the same time, that there is a narrative there for her to answer to. Like those people that I mentioned, the Bill Clintons, the spiritual advisor, the Harvey Weinsteins, the Epsteins, all in your circles, all fundraising together for the Democratic Party, hanging out on islands, on boats. But the people who, the Russell Simmons, the Michael Jacksons, the Bill Cosbys, now Kobe Bryant, there's an agenda to it doesn't look right. If there was some more mixture on each other's side, it might be like, maybe these are the ones she connects with, but there's a question mark there about her and Gayle and what their motives are and how they feel about particular types of people, black men specifically. So for me, I feel like that's a part of the story. Now we go on to Snoop Dogg. Look, it's a very simple line. He's very emotional. He's a Los Angelian, huge Kobe and Lakers fan. Yes. So very passionate, I get, but we don't talk about black women like that. We actually don't talk about women or people like that, but specifically black women. And that's why, for me, it's a very clear and simple, he's taken it down. He's apologized a little bit with a question mark, the apology tour and the whole wearing a mock neck jumper on Red Table Talk and looking like you've been crying for 4 hours. But, he's taken that down. He's taken it back. Gayle has accepted the apology and also said, the sensitivity. So that for me is left. But that question about what we do with people's legacies, I asked my friend Rhea about this topic, and here's what she shared with me.
I actually find this really difficult to talk about for a number of reasons. But I feel like it's really important that it is talked about. And this past week, it's felt more important than ever to stand up and speak out about this celebration of a sporting legend who did this terrible thing, this awful thing, and managed to get away with it scot-free. He admitted in his post-trial statement that the woman that he claims to have had sex with did not view that as consent, which is rape. And yet, because he's died, we don't talk about that. Because he was rich enough during his life to squash that, we continue that silence. I can't agree to that. And I think it does women and men a disservice. I think we should talk about Kobe Bryant being a sporting legend. I think that's really important. But I think we should give equal weight to this terrible thing that he did and that he admitted to doing. And I think by agreeing that we don't talk about that and that this is not the time to talk about rape allegations in the wake of this tragedy demonstrates the messed up attitude we have towards women and towards sport and popular culture and society. And it makes me really uncomfortable to have conversations with men that I love and respect, like my partner who grew up playing basketball and has a career in basketball and credits Kobe Bryant with being his childhood role model. It makes me really uncomfortable to be able to see these men separate their hero worshipping from the fact that this was a rapist. Because it's something that, for so many women, myself included, it isn't something we have the privilege of doing when it's a game that we so often lose. We should acknowledge that Kobe Bryant was a sporting legend, but silencing the fact that he raped a woman, and in a statement after a trial in which he was not acquitted, a trial that was squashed before it had the chance to get to court, the idea that we don't talk about that because we were able to, or he was able to silence the discussion at the time of his life, just is so flawed to me. I find it so skewed. I think shutting down these discussions sends a really clear message that ultimately supports rape culture, that rape culture is men who get to do terrible things, getting to be remembered as great and getting to be lauded over. And I have no doubt in my mind that Kobe Bryant was someone that did great things as well. He was a flawed human being like we all are. But the idea that we don't talk about the truth, and that particularly as journalists, we don't seek out truth, is problematic. We should always talk about truths. We should always strive for facts, no matter who is telling it and how uncomfortable it might be to hear it. You cannot talk about a sporting legend like Kobe Bryant without talking about the fact that he was accused of rape and admitted to having sex with someone who didn't feel that interaction was consensual. And I think it's really important to think about this in the context of the fact that 1 in 5 women in this country say they've been sexually assaulted, that only around 15% of them report it to police, that conviction rates for sexual assault are lower than any other crime, and that we send a message when we don't talk about Kobe Bryant's rape allegation. We send a message out that there is no good time to talk about this.
So for me, it's, I hear that, and I'm in the Believe Women camp. I'm in the equality camp. I'm in the view that we have to create space for people's experiences to be told. Us and our lenses, me as a black man telling women what they should and shouldn't think and feel around somebody is not really my space. But there's a piece of me that does want to, I did want to protect his legacy as much as possible. I was coming out of myself. I could feel myself itching to not be comfortable with it. And it's a really difficult question. So when I asked this question, which is, how do you accurately reflect on famous people with troubled or questionable instances in their history at the time of their passing and in general. How do we view him now? How do you view him now? I would love you to share with me on any platform or via hello@dopeblackdads.com, via email. Just how do you view him now? How do you feel about it? How do you feel about what we're talking about today? Do you resonate with any of it? What side of the fence are you on? And why, really? I would love to know. I think one of the key things about this podcast is that we have to be a voice and have a view, but we also have to be open to getting it wrong and putting ourselves out there with, these aren't wild views, but just an observation and the challenges that we're facing, because I assume I'm not the only one thinking this. I feel like this is a part of the discourse which is common and current. And now that he's finally resting in peace with his wonderful daughter, we can ask the question respectfully with those people who are mourning, can now go off and mourn, and we can sit there and figure out how we make society better as a result. I've been Marvin Harrison, founder of Dope Black Dads. Thank you so much for listening today. Please make sure you check us out and subscribe on wherever you find your podcasts. We'll also check out our website, dopeblackdads.com, and you can also find our podcast there. We have another Dope Black Dads and Dope Black Men fraternity event coming up soon, so make sure you sign up. Anything you need from us, just ask. I'm always in the DMs checking and making sure I'm reading comments. So just let me know how we can help you, and we will do our best. Anyway, for now, it's been me, Marvin Harrison, and thank you very much.